Welcome back. I sat down with New York Agriculture and Markets Commissioner Richard Ball when I started this story back in June. It was Dairy Month, and Ball had been speaking with dairy farmers, cooperatives, and processors from across the state. We'll pick the conversation up when I ask Ball about how he thinks the state and the dairy industry should be reacting to low dairy prices right now.
What can we do? We can invest in capacity. The first thing that came up was, let's make sure we have the capacity to take the milk that we have and turn it into products that are a little more shelf stable. We call that balancing. So things like cheese, things like yogurt, things like butter. Do we have modern enough facilities? Do we have enough? And so I've been able to go to our colleagues at Empire State Development and say, we need some help and investments here in modernizing some plants, some people that want to expand. Can we have some help here? And they've been very willing. And as a matter of fact, over the last 2 years, we've invested as a state over $50 million in modernizing a plant, helping a new owner get into a plant, or rehabbing an old plant. So I feel pretty good about that. We're continuing to invest in that to make sure that we can have the capacity to deal with the milk that we have. We're looking at marketing. Now, New York is pretty much New York milk, but can we do a better job, make sure that we capture all of the marketplace that is here? Can't control what China's going to buy, can't control some of the NAFTA discussions, but let's make sure in New York that we're making sure customers know to buy New York milk products. So we have a new brand for New York State for agricultural products. It's called New York Grown and Certified. And it'll tell a consumer, whether they be mom and dad in a grocery store, whether they be a wholesaler, retailer, restaurant chef, basically three things. Number one, that it's local, that it's New York product. And number two, that there's a food safety plan embedded in the production of that product. And number three, that that farm has an environmental stewardship plan in place on its farm. And so with that, we're able to say that any product that bears New York Grown and Certified and that the consumer sees, they'll know that it's grown to a higher standard here in New York than anywhere else in the country. So we can exploit that. Today we have 12 of our cooperatives and processors on board with it. Over 1,800 dairy farms are enrolled in the program now. So we can do that, and I think that's very helpful. We have a dairy promotion order board. You know, every farmer pays a little bit of money out of every milk check to go into promoting dairy products. And we have a group in New York that works on that and how to spend that money. And we've kind of worked with them to think outside the box and look for some new ways to talk about that. I'm excited about the prospects there. I think they're going to put on their marketing hats and think a little bit differently than traditionally. But I'm also kind of excited about, in our last budget, we got a great No Student Goes Hungry program in Farm to School that we have an opportunity to work on this year. And this one is, we're going to double the amount of money we spend on Farm to School. So educating our kids about what happens in New York State agriculturally is awesome. Something that the Commissioner of Health and I have worked on. We know that if we can get New York kids eating better right off the bat, we're going to have better health outcomes down the road when they're eating the right foods, which is going to be a good thing for our state. But we're also going to have better economic outcomes in our rural communities when we're using local products. And so to that end, we have a tremendous initiative getting started this year where New York's contribution to the school lunch in the cafeteria is going to change from what it's been for 40 years, 5.9 cents, up to 25 cents. And that's exciting. The hook is that they need to use 30% New York State agricultural products on the menu. I think that could be a real game changer for all our agriculture commodities, including dairy. But I think that's a very positive step. So I feel pretty good about some of the things we have in place and some of the directions we're going in.
If you do spike that demand, whether through that school lunch program or producing more cheese or butter or yogurt or just good marketing, making people want to drink milk, how does that translate to the price that farmers are paid for their milk? And how long would it take before they're making more money?
Yeah, hopefully sooner rather than later. Clearly, there's when you have a surplus, it just backs up the whole system, and that affects the price in a big way. You know, we can't, as I mentioned earlier, so much of it is determined by world situations, and that's very questionable today. We don't know exactly what trade is going to settle out to look like. It's on the news every night, every morning. We're talking about trade, talking about China, talking about Mexico, talking about Canada. We have to keep our fingers crossed on that one and have as much input as we can. But here in New York, expanding the marketplace should see some pretty quick results, because once we soak up that surplus of milk, then we begin to get in a normal cycle. Then we can look at margins getting better. And we're already seeing some signs that margins look better coming into this fall. We're seeing milk get up to a point where farmers can cover their cost of production a little better. And of course, along with all of this, moving targets, lots of them, we have a farm bill. And we have some insurance programs out there that have traditionally not fit dairy very well. In the budget bill this spring, we got one that's a little better. We've encouraged our farmers to take advantage of it. It's already starting to pay some dividends. Not the answer, but it's going to help them hopefully get through the next few months, and then we start to see prices slowly improve. And again, if our marketing efforts kick in, then hopefully the prices continue to rise.
Is that MPP that you're talking about?
Yeah.
Do you feel like you're being hurt by those alternatives like soy milk, almond milk, other alternatives on the market? Is that hurting demand?
I'm not sure how much that's affecting demand, but it is something that is a concern for our dairy farmers in a big way, because it confuses consumers. I was actually in Washington on Tuesday and met with the commissioner at FDA, Dr. Scott Gottlieb, who's I think a lot of, and we had a very frank discussion about this. They have regulations on their books about the identity of milk and what milk is, which they frankly have not done much about, have not enforced. But I think when a lot of consumers assume that almond milk, for example, or soy milk, or whatever the plant-based milk is the same quality, same nutrition, same protein, etc., as milk from cows. And it's not. It's different. The consumers certainly need to make a decision based on their needs, their dietary concerns, but they need to be informed, and they need to understand exactly what is milk and what is not milk. So, I get to be the commissioner of not just dairy farmers and vegetable farmers and soy farmers, all of them. But it's important that there's a clear understanding in the consumer mind when they go to make that decision. And that's not apples and apples, oranges and oranges. So that's our concern.
Is there anything the federal government could do better when it comes to setting the price or responding with programs to help farmers because of low prices?
Oh gosh, yes. Yeah. And we advocate for that. The two biggest agencies that we deal with in New York State, Agriculture and Markets, are of course the USDA and FDA. Those are our two biggest partners. So we advocate with both of those agencies, talk to them on a regular basis about things that we can do better. And this year we have an opportunity to have some impact on the Farm Bill, which obviously, 80% of that is in the nutrition title, but 20% of that is in the agriculture title. So although it's called the Farm Bill, but we did hearings all last year, talking about what's important to us in New York State. And I would have to say that our advocacy in the Farm Bill is more critical this year than probably it's ever been.
Okay. I told you, I was looking through your statistics. Back in 2007, there were 5,800 dairy farmers in New York. 2017, 4,500. So over a 20% drop. Is that just the future? Are we just going to have to face that there are going to be fewer dairy farms?
All the industries have changed, all the farms have changed. And if you go back to, when the country was founded, 80% of us were farmers, and now 1% of us are farmers. So some of that is a dynamic that's allowed, lots of professional people to leave the farm and no longer have to spend all day trying to feed themselves and be able to do more things. And it's helped our technology industry, it's helped our manufacturing, it's helped all of it. Some of that is an evolution. Some of it has been tough times in a particular industry. Some of that's consolidation and globalization. I think we've kind of balanced the milk market over the last 20 years by having some people get out of the business. In many cases, there are farms that had done it for many years but didn't have the next generation on the farm to take that over. That's a lot of what you're seeing, and that has kind of balanced the milk supply to some degree. But today, I think we have I don't think we need to see that continuing exodus. I don't think that's necessary. I think there will be a continuing exodus because there are people just generationally in that position where, hey, I did it, my kids are going off to school to be doctors or lawyers or newsmen or whatever. So there'll be those normal transitions. But I think today the dairy industry is far more sophisticated, and I think there's room for the small farm, there's room for the large farm, because depending on the market they're serving, I think there's opportunities in all those areas, frankly.
You're a farmer. If you were a dairy farmer and you had kids, would you tell them, would you make it an opportunity, a piece of advice for them to become a dairy farmer?
You know, I kind of tease my kids because growing up with dairy, now being a vegetable farmer, but growing up in dairy, I kind of miss it a little bit, and I kind of would like to add on some cows just so I could do some things differently. But here's what I would tell those kids, and what I do tell them. Matter of fact, I challenge them every year with this thought, because it was given to me about 20 years ago by a very wise banker. He said, the true definition of insanity is to do the same thing over and over again and hope that next year it's going to be different. So the answer is, for me and for my farm, and what I would recommend all farmers, is what are you going to do differently next year? Now, it doesn't mean necessarily leaving the business, but what can you do on your farm that's going to be different than the way you did it this year? On my farm, I ask my kids every year, what 6 things can we do differently next year? Is it a new piece of equipment? Is it a new crop to add to the mix? Is it a new way of doing things? Is it a new structure for our business? What can we do differently next year than we did last year? And secondly, who's our customer? And what do they want? And are we meeting their needs? And I think this is where the dairy industry in particular has kind of gotten separated. We've been so good at what we do in production that we don't think about the consumer or what they want. We think about filling our bulk tank up and getting the next load of milk out and increasing the production per cow. And we need to stop and kind of reset and think about who the customer is. What do they want? What are the trends? What's this next generation going to look for? There isn't milk on the breakfast table every morning like there was when we grew up. It's a different deal today. So how do we change? What kind of products? What kind of mix? And how do we do that?
Okay. And yeah, and you look at the numbers and you see how each cow is producing more milk and how successful dairy has been. But we've been to a sugar shanty before, and you see how even those are changing to promote agribusiness. When you say dairy's been left behind, is that what you mean? That the dairy isn't thinking about different ways to get new people involved or engage them differently? Agribusiness, for example?
Well, I want to be careful here because there's certainly a lot of great minds in the dairy world. But I think the fact that most of our dairy farmers don't have direct contact with their consumers has not benefited them. There's certainly a lot of good people in marketing working on this. But today, you know, you walk into the milk aisle and there's hundreds of products in that milk aisle. It's not just milk and cheese and butter anymore. There's all kinds of options. So I think we need to think carefully about marketing. I think we need to look at the trends in the marketplace and think about what products. And I would say this to any farmer. It doesn't start with what you like to grow or what you're good at growing. It starts with what the marketplace needs. So, you know, we've seen some farmers exit dairy, for example, and become dry bean farmers because there's an opportunity there, or become vegetable producers. So I think you just got to always think about who your customer is and what the market is and what the demand is and what makes sense. I do think that we have some great opportunities in dairy. We're not done. But I think knowing who the consumer is and what their trends are, what this next generation is going to look for in terms of products is great. Think back about yogurt, for example. I mean, you know, today New York State is the #1 producer of Greek yogurt in the country. You know, I think we produce as much or more Greek yogurt than Greece does. We've got some fabulous enterprises there, and it's been a huge growth sector. Thank goodness we have that business here because it's using lots of milk. We're one of the best cheese producers in the country. You know, thank goodness for that. We can expand those. We can grow those even more. And I think some of our yogurt producers have a very good idea about what the next generation wants, what kind of things they want, and some of the variation in products just with yogurt alone and cheeses alone. There's opportunities there to grow.
Governor Andrew Cuomo and the state legislature have noticed what farmers are going through, and they want to keep farmland, even if dairies fail. $30 million is now available to ensure land owned by dairy farms forever remains used for agricultural purposes. It's available to dairy farms diversifying, dairy farms transitioning to the next owner, or those getting rid of dairy but staying a farm. If you have an investigative idea, you can send it to us, newstips@wnyt.com. That's all we have for this week on Forum 13. We will see you next Sunday at 6 a.m. Thanks for watching.